All right, let's continue with our next chat as we rewind the clock. Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the first black president of South Africa on the 10th of May, 1994. Now, this marked the end of apartheid and the beginning of our democratic dispensation as a country. And so 31 years into our democracy, we're trying to spotlight on the meaning of this, what freedom means in a post-apartheid South Africa, perhaps also reflecting on the gains as well as the challenges over the past 31 years, perhaps also what we could envision next. And so for this chat, Verne Harris, former archivist to Nelson Mandela, as well as adjunct professor at NMNU, or the Nelson Mandela University, joins us for more. Prof. Verne, good morning, and thank you for joining us at this hour.
Good morning, a pleasure.
Verne, as we reflect on the significance of the 10th of May for South Africa, the evolution of our transition to democracy, even shining a spotlight on constitutionalism and the rule of law in South Africa, what are you observing 31 years later?
Well, I think we can celebrate a whole range of successes. You know, we could name, we've had free and fair elections over 3 decades. We have a robust civil society. Our judiciary has done well. The Constitutional Court work has been impressive. Most recently, the fact that we saw a former liberation movement being forced to share power. These are all indicators of a democracy that is alive and reasonably well. But we haven't done well enough, and we're confronted by enormous challenges. We should have done a lot better.
And so as we weigh up those highs and lows, I want to also shine a spotlight on leadership at large and what has been reflected. Perhaps if we look back at the stalwarts on our forefathers as well, but perhaps also given the juncture that we find ourselves in as a nation, what are those lessons that could be learnt from those stalwarts that should be implemented in this juncture for us as a nation?
Well, that's a big question. I think that many lessons that are still relevant for us today. Perhaps the most important is their commitment to the long game. You know, their endurance, their resilience. And I think, especially for young people today, the challenges seem so overwhelming. And the prospects of meaningful breakthroughs and meaningful change happening so slight that it's easy to, I think, give up and become cynical. But I think, you know, the inspiration of that generation of leadership is that you don't give up, and fighting the good fight matters, even if you lose that fight. I think we need that quality, and of course we need the extraordinary integrity, personal integrity that they had, because the temptations, I think, in our current context, to take the easy route out, to prioritize self, and you know, Madiba warned us in 1998. You often see erstwhile revolutionaries succumbing to greed and that temptation to, divert public resources for personal enrichment. And I think those temptations are still with us today.
Thank you for those words, Verne. I want to also just delve a little bit further into the history of our country in relation to Madiba. I mean, it's Africa Month as well. And so as we shine a spotlight on, you know, his reflections for the continent, Mandela himself began his travels across Africa under an alias as David Motsamai. And then perhaps also when he was deemed a terrorist or freedom fighter, depending on which lens you looked at him through. And then also as a statesman. What were his reflections about Africa and its diaspora, the plight of the most marginalized and oppressed as well? Anything come to mind?
Yes, I think that trip that Madiba made to many African countries in 1962 was very important for him. He learned fundamental lessons, and he understood the imperative of Pan-Africanism. Now, from the perspective of today, I think it's important for us to reckon with the reality that the deeply extractive relations that countries of the African continent have in relation to global capital, this has not been shifted fundamentally. And too often, still today, we see corrupt political elites being very happy to work with that global capital, with the wealth of our continent being extracted for the benefit of others. I think from a South African perspective, disturbing is that we still are not fully part of the continent in terms of consciousness and in terms of practice. On the one hand, we see the extent to which South African capital is extracting wealth from other African countries and is almost playing a kind of imperial role in relation to the rest of the continent. And on the other hand, you look at the extent to which what for me is Afrophobia inside our country, this hostility towards those who come from other parts of the continent. We've got a lot of work to do in that space before we can feel fully part of the continent and welcomed into the rest of the continent.
And then if we look at what has then transpired in relation to that, even 31 years into our democracy, is there a favorite lesson or memory from Utata Madiba that is still applicable today, that's even transformed you through your work?
Yeah, no, thank you. Many lessons that one learned from him directly. I think in recent years, for me, the one that has been most helpful, really, is remembering those moments at the Nelson Mandela Foundation when things were going wrong and colleagues were expressing distress and complaining and so on. And what Madiba would say is, it doesn't help to whine. What is the plan? And I think for us today, I don't want to speak for South Africa as a whole, but I think it is fair to say that we do a lot of whining in our country. And we need to be spending far more energy on building good energy around us and looking for solutions. I must just tell you, 2 days ago, I went with a friend down to Park Station. We got onto a metro train to Soweto. We visited the Mandela House Museum. And, what 5 years ago was a mess in terms of PRASA and our metro rail system has been transformed. These are good energies. These are things that we should be celebrating and being inspired by.
Yes. Well, Verne, in the role of, in the challenges and achievements that we've garnered over the past 31 years as well, I wonder, beyond his legacy, if we could even just look at our Constitution, some of the landmark judgments that have shaped our democracy, the relationship between the judiciary, other branches of government and civil society. What keeps you hopeful as well?
Yes, I think that, again, a lot to be grateful for there. But I think what has to be the priority for the next decade or so is turning those court rulings, those court judgments, and that constitution into a lived reality for people. There are too many, even constitutional court rulings, which have never been implemented. And, right now, a priority for the Nelson Mandela Foundation, for example, is land reform. Is we have a constitution which demands equitable access to land, but we haven't done well enough in terms of translating that into legislation and then implementing the legislation.
Well, Verne, it's a conversation starter, and we obviously asking the questions. We're looking at, what the strides that have been taken. We're looking at the gaps and really what the priorities are for the next 10 years or the next 31 years. Thank you for being part of this conversation and for reflecting further. We'll leave it there for now. Verne Harris, former archivist to Madiba, adjunct professor at Nelson Mandela University, joining us for a trip down memory lane, exploring concepts of freedom, 31 years into our democracy, perhaps also as we observe Africa Month. Again, thank you to him for making time to be with us.